All right, hello everyone. Welcome to week three. This week we will be discussing Jewish terrorism. Now, if you looked in Blackboard, there's multiple readings for this week. This video will cover the Jurgensmeyer chapter, but there's also three other readings included in Blackboard. Two of them provide a little more information about topics covered by Jurgensmeyer, and then the third reading, which would be chapter 8, if you look at it, discusses causes of Jewish terrorism. Be sure to read that chapter and really think about the conclusions the authors are reaching and the comparisons that they draw. I mean, you should read all of it, but make sure you read chapter 8 and think about what the authors are presenting there. So when you're thinking about terrorism and the Jewish people, we may be more inclined to think about them as the target of terrorism, be it from white supremacists, Hamas, or some other group or person. But just like other religions, there are terrorist perpetrators that adhere to the Jewish faith as well. So even though you can go back through history, back to biblical times, and find examples of Jewish terrorism, it's existed for many, many years. Jurgensmeyer begins with Meyer Edinger, who is the grandson of Meyer Kahane. Now, the radical nature of Kahane and his subsequent assassination are some of the more commonly known examples of a radicalized Jewish faith and terrorism. Both of these men, Edinger and Kahane, were described by Jurgensmeyer as being articulate and having a well-reasoned style that appealed to people. And that's oftentimes when we think about radicals or we think about extremists, we think about kind of these people with these real outlandish views and lots of yelling and screaming and, kind of think of people acting kind of, crazy, so to speak. But Edinger and Kahane were very much not that way. They were very, very articulate. And when they made their arguments, you could tell that they were really well-reasoned and very thought out. So when people with radical beliefs have these kind of personal traits, it allows them to more easily attract followers, and that can make them quite dangerous. Be it Jewish faith, be it white supremacist. I mean, whichever you want to pick. When you have people involved that have those kind of personal traits, that adds appeal to them. It does make them a little more dangerous. So both Meyer Edinger and Meyer Kahane believed that the country of Israel was not only a secular state, but rather a fulfillment of a biblical prophecy. Okay, so that meant that anyone that wasn't Jewish had to go, whether it be Palestinians, it didn't matter. Whoever wasn't Jewish did not belong in Israel. Now, to be fair, believing that the establishment of Israel is the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, that's not an uncommon belief, and that does not automatically mean that someone is a radical or someone believes in terrorism. It's just when you take those kind of beliefs to the next level. So for the remainder of this video, I'm going to refer to each of them just by last name, Kahane or Edinger. Now, Kahane, I'm going to spend more time on him because he's a much bigger player, so to speak, in the history of Jewish terrorism. He didn't always endorse the use of violence to advance his beliefs. He was involved actually in politics. He founded a political party. Now, the party itself was not very popular because he did have some extreme rhetoric, and it was actually outlawed because of that extreme rhetoric. But his involvement with the party, his involvement in politics, did raise his popularity and kind of put him in this leadership position for that particular belief system. Those that believed the way that he believed, he became a leader. He's also the founder of the Jewish Defense League in America. That group was founded to combat anti-Semitism, but they're also known to have committed acts of terror in the United States. He was virulently against allowing Palestinian Arabs to stay in Israel and was especially against Israel making peace with them by giving them land. because he believed that under no circumstances should Israel be giving anything to the Palestinians. So at the center of this belief system is what's known as catastrophic messianism. So this belief system is that the Messiah will come uh, after a great conflict, where the Jews triumph and praise God through their successes. And this is not necessarily considered to be a strange or a weird position. Since the establishment of Israel, there's been some that believe that the secular establishment of Israel was the forerunner to the religious state of Israel, which was kind of the original belief system. But this is where Kahane deviated from this normal belief system of catastrophic Zionism. He did not believe there was any significance to this secular establishment, and it had no bearing on the establishment of the future religious Israel. And that separated him from more of the mainstream kind of thought here. Now, Kahane's grandson, Edinger, he also adhered to this view. He believed that the current secular Israel would need to be destroyed before the biblical Israel could be established. So now, not only were outsiders such as Palestinians the enemy, but also now the secular Jewish state was also the enemy. So both Kahane and Edinger, as well as their followers, supporters, members of the JDL, Jewish Defense League, believed that if violence was necessary to achieve these goals, then so be it. Then it should be used. So Kahane at one time called for the people of Israel to rise up and reclaim the West Bank as an act of just war. Now, this term should be familiar to you already. You heard this term last week in the readings as well. This type of terminology was used by some of the Christian terrorists, just war. So Kahane claimed that defense was not the only religious basis for war. National pride is also a valid reason. Now, the Jewish faith allows for two types of war: obligatory war and permissible war. And obligatory refers to the defense, while permissible war means that war is allowed or when it's prudent for the state to do so. So as you can probably guess, when you leave that kind of definition, that leaves a lot of room, to fit things in or to manipulate situations to make it fit what you're trying to do. But traditionally, the Sanhedrin or a prophet was needed to make the determination on when just war was permissible. So there was a process in place for determining what was and was not permissible war. Now, here's the problem with modern times. The Sanhedrin no longer exists. Generally, prophets do not exist. So it is turned now to where rabbis could make these arguments for permissible war. Well, Meir Kahane just so happened to be a rabbi. So he believed that he was in the position then to make the arguments for permissible war under these circumstances. So he also justified the use of violence by belittling the humanity of those he was in opposition of by essentially stating that their lives did not have any worth, which is another common theme that you're going to find throughout religious terrorism. By dehumanizing people and kind of this good versus evil, it allows people to morally justify using violence against them. So he and his followers also believed what is called collective justice, where any member of this outgroup or their enemy was responsible for the actions of other members of that group and could be held responsible. So just because the person didn't have anything to do with it, because they were part of whatever group, they then could be held responsible and violence used against them because of that. So needless to say, Kahane was a controversial figure He had many, many enemies. He was actually murdered, assassinated in 1990. All right, so the second case study in Jurgensmeyer was Yoel Lerner and the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. So Yitzhak Rabin was the prime minister of Israel, and he was assassinated because of the result of him having peace talks with the Palestinians, because some Jews viewed them as a betrayal and an act of treason. While Lerner himself did not commit the assassination of Rabin, he was one of the Jewish leaders who believed that this was a betrayal, and it was actually an act of treason. He also rejected any Palestinian claims to any territory and hoped for the restoration of Israel under biblical law. At one time, he actually tried to blow up the Dome of the Rock to allow for the Jewish temple to be rebuilt. And he believed that the Messiah could only return after the temple was rebuilt and made ready. So he strongly believed that these peace negotiations were treason, and actually knew of discussions about what could the religious justifications be for the assassination of Jewish leaders who they deemed to be dangerous and enemies of Judaism. So he believed that the assassination of Rabin was justified due to his belief that the government was illegitimate, because it was formed with a coalition of Jewish and Arab votes, and the policies gave up some Jewish authority, and because he gave up state land, that was an act of treason, and of course the punishment for treason is death. So he regarded the assassin as well as Meir Kahane as martyrs in the cause of Jewish freedom. So his belief system is very, very similar to that of Kahane. And then finally, the case study of Baruch Goldstein and his attack on the Tomb of the Patriarchs. Now, Goldstein lived in the West Bank, and of course he witnessed violence at the hands of Arabs living there. But he was a prominent citizen in the settlement. He was a member of the town council. Military officials would seek him out whenever there was trouble and try to get him to be a peacemaker. And so when you combine those experiences within the settlement, that kind of builds up over time. And then there was an incident the evening before Purim where his worship was interrupted by Arab youths yelling for the slaughter of Jews. And this was kind of his final last straw. He was outraged. The officials did nothing about it. He believed that the Jews had been humiliated and had pretty much had enough. And then the following morning, he returned to the shrine and then killed 30 Muslim worshippers before he was subsequently killed by the crowd of people present. So there's a pretty elaborate gravesite near his home in an area called Kahane Square, who was one of Goldstein's mentors. So you see the connections here between all these various case studies. They have an ideological connection, and they also have connection through Meir Kahane. So it's actually a tourist site. Tourists, supporters of Kahane and Goldstein still visit the gravesite and still believe in their version of Messianic Judaism. So this form of Jewish terrorism is probably not going anywhere. Been around for a long time, and as everybody I'm sure knows, there's no peace right now between Israelis and Palestinians. We throw in Hamas into the mix, and there's attacks back and forth. So this is one side of it. Obviously, there's another side, but this kind of gives you an idea of what's going on regarding Jewish terrorism. All right, so I'm going to stop here for this week. Be sure to complete all the readings for this week and also the assignments in Blackboard. And as always, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to email me. And I'll see you all next week.